Hey folks, it's CS back here with another installment, and here's my review for UFC 144, Edgar versus Henderson. Alrighty folks, now I don't know about you guys, but I indeed got messed up on this card in terms of my picks. I went 5-7 overall. A lot of the underdogs came through, and props to them because some of them look good and shit. Tim Boetsch, really proud of what he did against Yushin Okami. Of course, Mark Hunt getting it done in Japan over Cheick Kongo. Who would have thought that guy would be in a 3-fight winning streak in the UFC, now back over 500 for the first time in 6 years. Again, props to Mark Hunt. Of course, Rampage Jackson getting messed up by Ryan Bader. And of course, Ben Henderson, becoming the new lightweight champion. So let's take a look at that fight. Again, if I can describe this whole night of fights overall, I would say turbulent. I think that's the perfect word for this night of fights. But yeah, let's start off with that main event. Ben Henderson winning that lightweight title from Frankie Edgar. Alrighty folks, now I'm going to explain to you why I picked Ben Henderson to win and why I thought he won in this fight. Why I thought he deserved it. Now I thought Ben Henderson would go out there and try to employ his cage and prey game plan that he's been doing to most of his opponents as of late, like Mark Bocek and Jim Miller and Clay Guida. He'd go up against them, push him against the cage, dirty box with them, and take him down from there. I thought he would do something like that against Frankie Edgar. He didn't, and he decided to outstrike him instead, and it actually worked out. Now I'm going to explain to you why I thought he was the more effective striker in that bout. I'm also going to explain to you why I thought he was controlling that bout in terms of his cage control. So let's start with that. Now I thought that for the most part Ben Henderson looked like the more comfortable person in the center of the cage. He was controlling the fight from there, and he really didn't look frustrated as much as Frankie Edgar did. I thought that Frankie Edgar's face, looked frustrated at the fact that, hey, I have a hard time dealing with this guy's power, and I'm not coming in as often as I should, like he did against, a Gray Maynard or a BJ Penn. Someone, like those guys had a real hard time with his speed. Ben Henderson really didn't. I thought he looked comfortable controlling the center of the octagon, and I thought he was dictating the pace of the fight because of it. Now, of course, Frankie got Ben down here and there. I understand that. But it's not like Ben was on his ass for that long. If Chris Carrioso can win a fight off his back and was there for the majority of the fight, holy crap, I don't think Ben Henderson lost that fight. You know what I'm saying? He didn't spend a heck of a whole lot of time on his back, and I think that he was more effective on the feet than Carrioso was from the ground. So I can't say Ben Henderson was losing this fight via cage control, you know what I'm saying? Because I don't think he was getting controlled. I thought he was controlling Frankie Edgar because I thought he was in the right place, the place he wanted to for the majority of the fight. Again, that's in the pocket. Now, in the pocket, he was effectively outstriking Frankie Edgar because I thought Frankie Edgar's combinations weren't hurting Ben as much as Ben was hurting Frankie with his power. I thought that Ben's quality of strikes was better than the quantity that we saw out of Edgar. Now, I'd rather get hit with 25 Frankie Edgar punches from that fight than 20 Ben Henderson punches. And for the most part, in terms of the strike rate, that's how much Frankie outstruck Ben Henderson by. But again, I just think that the more painful punches were from Ben Henderson, so I gave him effective striking as well. Now, this bout differs from the Nick Diaz-Carlos Condit main event because, sure, Carlos Condit had volume on his side against Nick Diaz, but that's really the only reason he beat Nick Diaz, because Nick Diaz wasn't effective enough with his power punches. I really don't think any of those guys were hurting each other. I thought the guy who was inflicting more pain was Ben Henderson in this bout, which is why I gave him effective striking. I don't think any of those guys, Nick Diaz and Carlos Condit, were hurting each other. So if I'd have to give the striking to anyone, it was to the guy who threw and hit more, and that was Carlos Condit, because you have to consider his kicks. This is not just a boxing match. Now, of course, effective grappling went to Nick Diaz in the 5th round, and some people thought that was icing the cake for Nick Diaz, but in the first 4 rounds, you can't even give him cage control, because I don't even think he was in control by just stalking his opponent. He looked more uncomfortable in the pocket just stalking Carlos Condit than Ben Henderson did against Frankie Edgar. To me, the guy on the outside in this bout, in Frankie Edgar, looked more frustrated because he was getting frustrated by this guy's power in Ben Henderson, and Carlos Condit wasn't frustrated by whatever Nick Diaz was throwing at him. His game plan was initially to hit and run anyway, so that's why I thought Carlos Condit was doing his thing and was in control of that bout. So that's why that bout is different than this bout because, you know, again, Carlos Condit, higher volume, cage control by hitting and running, but Frankie Edgar didn't do that against Ben Henderson because Ben Henderson was more comfortable in the pocket and he landed the harder shots. So that's why Ben Henderson won that fight, in my opinion. Now, what's next for Ben Henderson? Of course, Anthony Pettis. They're giving him the rematch. And yeah, I think Pettis kind of deserves it because it's not like Maynard deserves it. It's not like they want to give Frankie another opponent twice in a row for the third time straight. Who knows what they do with Frankie Edgar? I think he gets maybe a Clay Guida. I think that would be a good fight for him. I think that can headline a free card. But again, it's all about the smooth one tonight. Congratulations to Ben Henderson. Alrighty, folks, now let's move on to that light heavyweight co-main event between Quinton Rampage Jackson and Ryan Darth Bader. And, of course, Rampage Jackson lost to Ryan Bader via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the board for Ryan Bader. Kind of embarrassing for Rampage Jackson in his homecoming to Japan. And I'm going to say homecoming because he friggin' loves it there. And he pretty much, you know, made his career there. You know, that's where I remember Rampage the most. Because in the UFC, you really didn't do anything noteworthy for me except for beat Vanderlei Silva and Chuck Liddell. Both of the guys were on the twilight of their career when that shit happened. So yeah, when he was actually competing with other guys in his prime, that was Pride. And yeah, to me that's my most memorable moments of watching Rampage Jackson fight. Now I think that watching him here is just, you know, he's a shell of himself. It's sad. He never used to have that bad takedown defense. And he used to be able to let his hands fly more. Of course, he was hurt in this fight. He had a nagging knee injury, which is why he was out of shape. You know, he couldn't cut weight correctly, so that's why he weighed in at 211. So his balance was off as well because of his knee injury as well. So Ryan Bader, someone who's not normally supposed to be able to take him down, does. And yeah, he was able to hold him down and employ ground and pound over the course of 3 rounds. Easy 30-27 win for Ryan Bader. Of course, Ryan Bader suffered getting slammed like an accordion in round 2, but he quickly recovered. Rampage just didn't have anything rather offensive for Ryan Bader. Besides that, he couldn't even get anything off on the feet. So that's kind of sad. Solid win for Ryan Bader, though. What's next for him? I think he faces the winner of Alexander Gustafsson and Antonio Rogerio Nogueira. I know he already beat Nogueira, but he's most likely losing that fight. So I think him versus Gustafsson would be a very good fight. Have 2 prospects go at it again. Last time Bader faced another prospect, he got wrecked. Of course, that's a new champion right now in John Jones. And yeah, I don't think Rampage is ever going to get to that level to where he is able to compete against top 5s, let alone the champion in John Jones. I think he's officially done. I think he really has to consider retiring. If not, if he wants to kick it around still, I think that fight against Rich Franklin, I think that would make sense. You know, it's never been brought up, but I think that would be a fight that makes sense. Both those guys, again, are in the twilight of their careers. And, yeah, why not make it happen? You know, I think it would make sense, just saying. So, yeah, happy trails to Rampage Jackson, and congrats to Ryan Bader for a hard-fought win. Alrighty, folks, now let's move on to that Mark Hunt Cheick Kongo heavyweight bout. And, of course, Mark Hunt won via first-round TKO punches. And if you picked Mark Hunt to win, most likely it would have been in a similar fashion like this. You know, rather early because he wasn't grinded upon yet. And, yeah, he's still going to have that fresh power. So, yeah, that's why you would have picked him, of course, in a devastating fashion as well. Now, I think that Cheick Kongo should have stuck to the game plan of cage and prey and then take down from there and then solid ground and pound and win via submission or knockout. I thought that's what Cheick Kongo wanted to do. I really don't know why he reverted into, you know, a K1 level striker, which he isn't. So that's why he got knocked out. You know, he got red rather easily. He threw that cross. Mark Hunt slipped that punch and then pop. Countered with a right. Of course, Cheick Kongo dropped. And, yeah, he got followed up with more punches from Mark Hunt. Mark Hunt finished for the TKO. Of course, Herb Dean came in there with an early stoppage. And that's probably to the benefit of Cheick Kongo because I don't think he would have wanted to take more bombs from Mark Hunt. You know, Mark Hunt would not make the same mistake Pat Barry would. Just saying. So if you're expecting a comeback of the year from Cheick Kongo, that wasn't going to happen right there, especially with early as Herb Dean as a ref. But solid win for Mark Hunt. Where does he go from here? I think Stefan Struve would be a good fight. You'd have, again, some of the UFC's old versus the UFC's new. You know, I think that would be a good fight for Mark Hunt. I think he most likely wins that fight as well, which is sad. And guys, who would have thought that Mark Hunt would be over 500 in 2012 in the UFC? getting it done. 3 straight wins, and of course this one coming over a top 15 opponent in Cheick Kongo. So props to Mark Hunt, more power to him. As for Cheick Kongo, who does he face? I think Dave Herman would be a good fight. And yeah, we'll see what's next for these guys in the near future. Who knows? But props to Mark Hunt once again. Alrighty, folks, now I'm going to keep this next one short. That's a middleweight bout between Yoshiro Akiyama and Jake Shields, of course, and it was ugly as hell. When Jake Shields is outstriking the opponent for, 2 rounds, sucks ass. Akiyama, I know he had a tough cut making 170, and he thought he would be weak, trying to stuff all those Jake Shields takedowns, and he was, but he wasn't doing anything in the process. Jake Shields would be jabbing away at his face, and then, the right crosses Jake Shields was throwing, ugly as fuck. That was just ugly. Like, Akiyama lost his 4th fight in a row against Jake Shields, and it's because Jake Shields outstruck him. It wasn't a fight of night at all, of course. So Yoshiro Akiyama, I think he should be cut. That was just rather terrible. What's next for Jake Shields, though? Maybe Josh Koscheck. I think that fight makes sense. Josh Koscheck wants a name, and give it to him in the form of Jake Shields. I hope he'd be excited for that one. Alrighty, folks, now let's move on to that Yushin Okami Tim Boetsch middleweight bout. And this was a rather solid performance from Tim Boetsch, in my opinion. Sure, he was getting struck in the first couple rounds, but what he did in round 3 really impressed me, and he just displayed this sense of urgency and said, hey, I'm not doing this with my wrestling. I'm not doing this with my technical boxing. Let's turn it into a brawl. Of course, Yushin Okami obliged. He started dropping his hands. He was getting tired, and Tim Boetsch was connecting with those, haymakers. And of course, Yushin Okami eventually was on the rails, and then he got finished via TKO with more punches from Tim Boetsch. So props to Tim Boetsch for showing a sense of urgency. A lot of guys would just quit there and continue to get outboxed by a gassing Okami. So yeah, props to Tim Boetsch. What can I say? Who knows who he gets now? I was thinking he was going to get Mark Munoz, but then I thought about it. I think they should make Mark Munoz versus Vitor Belfort. I think that's a relatively marketable fight that can possibly headline a card. I think they should make Tim Boetsch versus Chris Weidman because of that. Both these guys are on win streaks, and they're kind of hot in middleweight, so why not make it happen? They're kind of fresh in terms of, how long they've been in the middleweight division in the UFC as well, so, why not make that fight happen? Again, props to Tim Boetsch for getting it done over Yushin Okami. Alrighty, folks, now let's move on to that Hatsuyoki Bart Palashevsky featherweight bout, and this is one of 2 bouts on the card that really didn't surprise me in terms of what went down. Hatsuyoki coming out there and out grappling Bart Palashevsky in rounds 1 and 3. Like, can you guys be surprised? Bart Palashevsky is a pretty solid black belt as well. I didn't think he was going to get tapped out, but I thought he would be put in those submission attempts, say if he was put to the ground, and of course he got put to the ground. It was expected, however. Bart Palashevsky really has piss poor takedown defense, although, we thought he might be stronger than some of these 145ers. Apparently not for Hatsuyoki. Hatsuyoki does have a high center of gravity, but he did do a good job of tripping Bart Palashevsky to the ground, so props to him for doing that, and of course maintaining solid top control, going for submission attempts. And yeah, he almost finished with a neck crank in round 3. That would have been nice, but yeah, just an overall grappling clinic from Hatsuyoki. Of course, he had that nice 10-8 round to kick things off, but in round 2, Bart Palashevsky kind of turned it up with his striking, and I was like kind of afraid. Is Hatsuyoki going to revert to the George Roop Hatsuyoki where he just loses his killer instinct? He doesn't, because in round 3 he comes back and just proceeds to outgrapple Palashevsky even more. So props to Hioki on a very solid win. What's next for him? Maybe the winner of Chan Sung Jung and Dustin Poirier. Who knows? I think that might be a good fight. Hatsuyoki, though, I think he's definitely deserving of top 3 in the world for the featherweights in terms of what he's done, and I think this is a very good win for him over Palashevsky, someone who was actually feared in featherweight. So again, props to Hatsuyoki. Alrighty, folks, now let's move on to that lightweight bout that kicked off the main card between Anthony Pettis and Joe Lauzon. Now, I'm not sure what was a better performance, Anthony Pettis getting it done in the first round against Joe Lauzon, or Ben Henderson's win over Frank Yeager. Like, I don't know, because beating Joe Lauzon in the first round is huge in my books, because Joe Lauzon is just a crazy first round fighter, and he's put away some solid dudes in the first round. Again, that last win over Melvin Guillard, not a lot of people thought he was going to be able to do that, and he did. So just saying, Joe Lauzon is a beast in round 1, and a lot of people thought Anthony Pettis would lose round 1 and then win the next 2 after Joe Lauzon got tired. But no, he just decided to pull the trigger in round 1 and just beat Joe Lauzon. You know, Joe Lauzon didn't look himself in the first round, though. I thought he was preparing for 3 rounds, and he looked like he was going to fight for 3 rounds. Usually, he's up in your grill already by that time when Anthony Pettis kicked him. But no, Anthony Pettis had some space, and he pulled the trigger, so solid win for Anthony Pettis. What's next for Anthony Pettis? Of course, that title fight against Ben Henderson. The rematch, can't wait for this one. Does he beat the Ben Henderson that fought tonight? Yeah, he does, because I think he's too dynamic of a striker. But Ben Henderson can expose Anthony Pettis the way Clay Guida did. It's just a matter of, is he going to do so or not? You know what I mean? So the blueprint to beat Anthony Pettis is out there. Ben Henderson has the skills to do so, but who knows if he does. We'll see. I can't wait for that fight. That's all I'm going to say. But Joe Lauzon, what's next for him? Maybe the loser of Nate Diaz, Jim Miller. I think that would make sense. But again, guys, all about that Showtime tonight. Props to Anthony Pettis. Alrighty, folks, now let's move on to the preliminary card and take a look at it really fast, starting with that lightweight bout between Takanori Gomi and Eiji Mitsuoka. Now, Mitsuoka has some solid submission grappling skills. We saw him at work in round 1 against Gomi. Of course, Gomi survived that reverse mounted triangle and all of that. Mitsuoka took that pretty handily, 10-9 in the first round, but of course, he became a gas grappler in round 2, and gas grappler versus Takanori Gomi with some, gas tank. Takanori Gomi gonna knock this dude out, and that's what happened. Solid TKO win for Gomi in that round 2. What's next for Gomi? I don't know. I just don't think he gets it done against well-rounded competition from, say, the United States or Brazil. His style really hasn't evolved, which is unfortunate. I'll still cheer for him, but, what can I say? I think he's done too, just because I don't see him improving. Solid win for him, nevertheless. Now let's move on to someone who really is done, Norifumi Kid Yamamoto. Of course, against Vaughn Lee. Vaughn Lee got him done with that armbar. Damn, some nice transitions there. Transition from triangle into that armbar. Of course, he was outstriking Yamamoto for the most part on the feet. Yamamoto did have some success, but Vaughn Lee started finding his range. He does have some solid submission grappling skills and striking skills. I think he's a decent prospect out of the UK. Solid win for Vaughn Lee. Kid Yamamoto really should contemplate retiring. Now let's move on to the middleweight bout between Ricky Fukuda, Steve Cantwell. Like I already mentioned, this is the other bout that didn't surprise me whatsoever. Fukuda just better at everything. Cantwell gassed as well. 5 fights in a row. He should get cut. As for Ricky Fukuda, again, solid, well-rounded win. Again, just better at everything. Wrestling, striking, submission grappling, although we really didn't see that. Yeah, I think Fukuda's a solid middleweight out of Japan. Kind of like, what's his face? Okami, but of course he fought like shit. Yeah, Fukuda should face the winner of Court McGee, Konstantinos Philippou. I think that would make sense. Of course, the other FX card bout was Takei Mizugaki versus Chris Carriasso. Takei Mizugaki did everything he could have to win that fight via decision. He wasn't going to beat Carriasso cleanly on the feet. Carriasso's too dynamic of a striker. And he was kind of outstriking Takei Mizugaki here and there when it was on the feet. And I thought that the judges wouldn't overvalue that. I guess they did, and they overvalued the little amount of submissions Carriasso was throwing up on his back when he was on the mat for the majority of the fight with Takei Mizugaki. He threw maybe 4 or 5 that caught Mizugaki in, and Mizugaki wasn't even close to tapping. Mizugaki was escaping him easily. So the majority of the bout was Chris Carriasso on his back getting grounded, pounded upon, and he still won the fight. Not fair for Mizugaki. He should have won that fight at least 29-28 across the board for him. Of course, instead it was 29-28 across the board for Carriasso. Carriasso, my dude, though, solid win for him. He still beat the number 10 featherweight in the world in Mizugaki. But again, I thought Mizugaki should have won that. The other bout that we didn't cover yet, of course, Issei Tamura versus T. Quinn Zhang. Thank God T. Quinn Zhang did not go to decision with Tamura, because it most likely would have been Tamura on top of T. Quinn Zhang and just defending guillotine attempts. Glad Issei Tamura got it done via knockout in the second round. Props to him. But I guess that about does it for my review of UFC 144. Again, I had a lot of fun watching this card, although I did get a lot of shit wrong in it. But then again, I'm pretty sure most people did, so I don't feel that bad because of it. And again, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. So comment in the comment section below, tell me your thoughts on this card. Again, my links are in the comment section, in the description below as well. And I guess I'll see you for my UFC on FX Alves vs. Kampmann preview. So stay tuned for that. And I guess that about does it for me. Thanks again. Deuces for all my supporters, bruises for all my haters. Again, take care and peace.